Golden Circle, again directed by Matthew Vaughn, who directed the previous movie, Kingsman, The Secret Service, a movie in which I liked a hell of a lot. I really enjoyed the first movie, Kingsman. I haven't done a review for that yet for this channel. I just missed it, actually. When I started this channel a lot long after I'd seen the first movie. But yeah, very good film that. So this time around, the Kingsman's headquarters are destroyed and the world is held hostage. So what the Kingsmen do is they team up with the Statesman and to take on Julianne Moore's villain, Poppy Adams. She's the head of a drug cartel called the Golden Circle. And she's this recluse who lives on some island somewhere, surrounded by like 50s, 60s nostalgia. And I kind of like that. And that's basically the plot, really. The Kingsmen team up with the Statesman. It's the American version of the Kingsmen. And they team up to take on Poppy Adams. So when it comes to plot in this film, there isn't really much of one. But what this film does have is some incredible, insane, wild action scenes. I really dug the action scenes in this film. It was probably the best thing about this film, really, was the action scenes for me. I loved the way they were shot. They were very sort of inventive and creative. The way Matthew Vaughn decided to shoot a lot of the scenes, it was very quick editing. And I just really dug it. Some people have didn't like what Matthew Vaughn did with the action in this movie, but I really liked it. It was sort of different the way he shot these scenes. I found it immersed me more into the action, even though the action is incredibly over the top. Like, it does get to a point where it's not really believable, but then, you know, this is a fun movie. It's very aware of itself. It doesn't take itself too seriously, so you can sort of get away with that over the top action. But yeah, I just really liked how Matthew Vaughn decided to shoot the action in this film. I really dug it. It also has a really fun, over the top, insane car chase at the beginning of this film, and there were moments in that scene where I was like, oh wow, this is getting ridiculously insane now, but it was enjoyable. And again, going back to the way Matthew Vaughn decided to shoot those scenes, just the way he used the camera and everything, it was sort of immersive. But anyway, like I said, the action in this film was, for me, was the highlight. It was the best thing about this film. I was slightly disappointed with the sequel, and I was really looking forward to it, and I am a big fan of the first film. And I am a big fan of director Matthew Vaughn, but I was a little disappointed with this film. It was fun, it was enjoyable, but I was disappointed. So what didn't I like? Well, for me, this film delved into nothing new. It didn't really give us anything new. The characters within the movie didn't really grow. It was more of a retread of the first movie, it felt like. It had very similar beats to the first movie when it comes to narrative, especially that third act. And some might argue with me on my next point, but I do feel like the violence in this movie was toned down as well compared to the first one. And it seemed more cartoon-like. For example, there's one scene which includes a meat grinder, okay? Now, for those that have seen it will know what I'm on about. I'm not going to say anything more about this scene. But it was like, it seemed very cartoon-like when it came to the violence within that moment. And so for me, that was a little bit of a letdown. Because one of the things I liked about the first movie was the really sort of graphic, over-the-top violence. And I felt like, even though this is a violent movie, don't get me wrong, it just wasn't, for me, on the same level as the first movie. And that meat grinder scene could have become a very iconic moment. It reminded me of a moment from Fargo, the wood chipper scene. But it just lacked sort of blood. It just lacked any sort of... It was just very cartoon-like. I just didn't like the way it was funny. It made me laugh. Especially, you know, regarding what Julianne Moore's character was actually doing within that scene. But it just sort of fell flat. And there were a lot of moments in this film where nothing happened either. It has a long run time. I think it's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. But there was a lot that could have been cut from this film. There were a lot of moments where just nothing really happened. And there were a lot of pointless scenes in this film that sort of added nothing new to the story or the characters or the world. That goes back to me being disappointed with the fact that this movie didn't really delve into anything new and give us anything new. And there were a lot of moments in this movie where nothing really happens. And there were a lot of pointless scenes. Now, if there were moments or scenes in which they added character development or world building, then fair enough. But they didn't. So yeah, this movie really didn't offer anything new for, those that really enjoyed that first movie. This film didn't have that iconic action scene like the first movie, The Secret Service. It had the church scene. I loved that scene. But this film, coming from it, it was like nothing really I couldn't remember a moment which really sort of jumped out at me like that scene from the first film. There was no iconic moment within this film like that first movie. We do get a cameo from Elton John in this movie. That was kind of funny but odd at the same time. But it was amusing. I just wish they sort of did more with him a little bit. They seemed to it was almost like they thought, right, let's get Elton John in there. Let's have Julianne Moore's character, Poppy Adams, kidnap Elton John, to add a bit of humour to the film. But it was almost as if they were like, oh, we don't really know what to do with him other than lock him up in a cage. And so you could see it was almost as if they were struggling to sort of give Elton John something to do in the film. So in a way, it seemed odd. He was actually given a little bit more screen time in this movie than I thought he might have. And so that felt a bit odd. I don't think they really needed as much of Elton John in this film as they did, but I liked it anyway. And Elton John's actually quite a funny man. I just love it when he's screaming at Julianne Moore. So the characters of the film. Taron Egerton returns as Eggsy. I like what he's done with the character. He's created a very likeable character. Colin Firth returns as Galahad. I was really happy to see him return. Actually, even though it sort of, made me think, how on earth how are they going to work that one out? Spoiler alert for those that haven't seen the first film, by the way. But yeah, I was just really happy that he was returning. The only thing I didn't like with what they did with his character this time around, like, I keep going back to the first film, but Colin Firth had that moment in the first film, and that was the church scene. It was a great moment. So they bring him back in this one. And he starts off and he's sort of like, he's not right. He's sort of missing the marks. He's lost his balance. He can't quite fight the same way. And, he's being told by Merlin, Mark Strong's character, look, it's going to come in time. You've had your brains blown out. So, it's going to take time for it all to come back to you. So I was expecting this moment to happen during the third act where Colin Firth just kicked ass. And we never had it. Colin Firth never had that moment. His character never had that moment. And I was sort of expecting it. And then I was a bit let down by that. So let's talk about the American side briefly for a moment. The Statesman. The characters really did interest me. It was almost as if they just shoved them in for the sake of it. They were hardly in this film. You had Channing Tatum. You had Jeff Bridges. And they were hardly in the film. It seemed very pointless to have these characters, the statesmen, in this movie. They just seemed to be, they just seemed as if they were thrown in for the sake of it. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But they were very sort of uninteresting. I didn't really care for them, the characters. And so you had all these sort of big names like Tatum and Jeff Bridges and Halle, and they weren't really utilised like I thought they might be. Julianne Moore's character, Poppy Adams, I kind of liked it. I kind of liked what she did with the character. And the fact that she's this recluse on this island surrounded by all the 50s and 60s nostalgia. She was actually quite an interesting character, and I wanted to know more about her, actually. And in a way as well, I sort of wanted them to give her more to do as well, because I did like what she was doing with the character. I just don't think they really utilised her like they could have. I'm going to go back to the meat grinder scene, which Julianne Moore's character is involved with, and it was her that actually really made me laugh in that scene. Just the way she sort of reacted, and she has this sort of very cold look about her, but psychotic at the same time and twisted. And I just, like I said, I just really liked what she did. She was quite funny in this film, but overall this movie was not quite as funny as the first film. It did make me laugh a few times, but just wasn't quite as funny as I really wanted it to be, and it wasn't as memorable as the first movie. Like I said previously, it was just too much of the same, too much of a retread. So there is no real plot. Full of really pointless moments and scenes. There is a moment actually that involves Glastonbury and planting a tracker in a very creative way, but you know, this film was just sort of, the pacing was way out, very sluggish at times, and it was very it was just way out, the pacing within this film. And I just want to go back to sort of characters not having the moments. Now, Mark Strong's character Merlin, I really thought he was going to have a moment in this film as well, especially during the third act where they sort of picking their weapons and he picks up this knife. I really thought he was going to do more with that knife than just cut a couple of bushes down, to be honest with you. So yeah, again, I was just a little bit let down with what they did with his character and what I thought they were going to do. This movie did seemed as if it was going into one direction with characters, and it never did. So to sum this film up, it was like a pick and mix of all your favourite moments from the first movie, remixed and turned up to 100%. Like, I did have a lot of fun with this film. I did enjoy it, especially when it comes to the action scenes. Like I said, I think one of the best things to come out of this film is the action. You know, in part it is fun and entertaining. It's got insane action scenes. It's just there were a lot of moments in this movie that didn't need to be in the movie and could have been cut. So yeah, the runtime could have been decreased. I mean, this did feel like a long film as well, but that was because of the pacing and the fact that this film was filled with so many moments that just didn't need to be in it. Scenes that could have just been taken out or changed and added. You know, even if they just added something more to the characters, would have been something, but no. But if you liked the first film like me, then you probably are going to enjoy this film. Like, this is not a terrible film at all. It was just, compared to the first film, which was a really good film, and I will review that one day, this was a disappointment. So I will be giving Kingsman: The Golden Circle a C+. So what did you guys think of the latest Kingsman movie? Let me know below. I'd really like to know, was there anything you agreed or disagreed with me and my views on this film? Please let me know, and if you like me and you share the same passion, then why not hit subscribe?